Savannah had always been a city of ghosts, but that summer, the silence felt heavier than ever. It clung to the skin like the thick southern humidity and settled deep into bones like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. The cicadas sang their eternal dirge in the background, but even their hum couldn't drown out the gnawing unease that had taken root inside Claire Bennett. She sat alone on a veranda of the old Victorian house on Chestnut Street, watching the heat ripple across the yard like waves in a desert. Her coffee had gone cold half an hour ago, but she still held the cup in both hands, as if clinging to its warmth might anchor her to the present. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but Claire had lived long enough to know that appearances were liars. Ethan, her husband of 4 years, had been working late again, third night in a row. He always stayed late before big trials, burying himself in case files and strategy. But this time, something was different. His energy had shifted, subtle at first, like a painting slightly off-center, then unmistakable. His eyes avoided hers. His smile no longer reached the corners of his mouth. And when he kissed her goodnight, it was no longer on the lips, but on the forehead, distant, habitual, hollow. For the past few days, Claire had the distinct feeling that someone was watching her, a shadow in the corner of the room that vanished when she turned her head, footsteps echoing in the hallway when she was certain she was alone. Once, she thought she saw a figure standing beneath the oak tree in their backyard at dusk, but when she stepped closer to the window, there was nothing. That morning, she found a long blonde hair on Ethan's blazer. She hadn't asked. She didn't need to. The call from Harper Lane came unexpectedly. 10 years had passed since Claire last heard her voice, but the sound of it transported her back in time to dorm rooms and whiskey-fueled confessions, and the night everything between them fell apart. Now, Harper was back in town, just passing through, she said, but Claire knew better. Harper never did anything without a reason. They met that evening at Magnolia's, the old Southern-style restaurant where the wine was expensive and the secrets cheaper. Harper looked the same, flawless, confident, deadly. Her presence was a trigger, a flare shot into the sky of Claire's already cracking world. By the end of the night, Claire's world had shifted again. She returned home feeling hollowed out, her thoughts swirling like storm water circling a drain. Harper had seen Ethan in Jacksonville with another woman, younger, close, intimate. Harper didn't say it to hurt her, at least not entirely. She said it because she knew the taste of betrayal and misery. After all, love's company. At home, Claire stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom and stared at her reflection. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she slowly slid her wedding ring off and placed it gently on the vanity. The sound it made when it touched the wood was barely audible, but in the silence of that moment, it echoed like a gunshot. She wasn't sure what came next. The house felt different now, colder, larger, as if something unseen had crept into the corners during the night and waited, breathless, in the dark. On the porch, she found a folded piece of paper wedged beneath the welcome mat. There was no name, no explanation, just one word, written in black ink, trembling at the edges as if the writer had been rushed or afraid. The next morning, the world seemed quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just quiet, as if something had taken a breath and never exhaled. Claire awoke to the sound of wind tapping against the window panes. Though the air outside was still, the message from the night before, the single word scrawled in haste, burned in her mind like a fever dream. She had placed a note in the top drawer of her nightstand, but its presence loomed over her like an open wound. It hadn't been a prank. She knew that with the kind of certainty that didn't come from logic, but from instinct, the kind that hums in the gut when danger is near. Ethan hadn't come home that night. His absence no longer required excuses. There was no emergency call, no text, no apology, just silence. It was louder than anything he could have said. She didn't bother calling. What would she say? What would he say in return? Lies were always worse when they came with a steady voice. The day unfolded with the tension of an overdrawn violin string. She moved through the house like a ghost, touching surfaces, straightening picture frames, wiping invisible dust from shelves. The home they had built together now felt foreign, staged, like a set waiting for the next scene of a play whose ending had already been written in blood. That afternoon, Claire drove to the lake on the outskirts of town. It was a place she hadn't visited in years. When she was younger, it had been a sanctuary, a quiet escape during college summers, a place to read, to think, to disappear for a while. The water there was dark and still, ringed by trees that always looked just a little too tall, a little too dense, as if hiding something. She parked beneath a willow and walked down the cracked wooden path toward the shore. The lake mirrored the sky, gray, swollen, threatening rain. There was no one around, just the water and the sound of distant thunder, too far to matter, but close enough to feel. She stood at the edge for a long time, trying not to think, not about Ethan, not about Harper, not about the way everything she trusted seemed to be dissolving beneath her feet. But then she saw it, floating near the dock, just beyond the reeds, was something pale, too pale. She stepped closer, heart now hammering against her ribs. It could have been driftwood, a plastic bag, a trick of light. But as she leaned over the edge of the dock, the truth surfaced. It was a body. The water had swallowed most of it, but the face was visible, swollen, gray-blue, lifeless, eyes half open, a gash above the brow, blonde hair fanned out like seaweed. Claire stumbled back, choking on air, her legs weak and trembling. Her first thought wasn't to call the police. It wasn't even to scream. Her first thought was, I know her. She had seen that face before, not in real life, but in photos. It was a girl from Harper's description, the one Ethan had been with in Jacksonville, the one with the hand on his leg. Now she was dead. The police arrived within 20 minutes, though to Claire it felt like a lifetime stretched thin and brittle. She hadn't meant to stay by the lake, but her body wouldn't move, even after she made the anonymous call from a payphone near a shuttered gas station. Her feet brought her back to the dock like a compass pointing towards something irreversible. By the time flashing lights sliced through the quiet of the woods, she convinced herself to be just another witness, just someone who happened to find the body. Nothing more. But guilt is a scent, and it lingers. The body was pulled from the water with slow, deliberate hands. A tarp was laid beside the dock, and a woman in gloves crouched to examine what remained. The air filled with the smell of algae rot and something metallic, like iron left too long in the rain. The lake swallowed secrets, but not well. They placed the body in a black bag and zipped it shut. The sound of the zipper was the only punctuation in the air, and Claire found herself flinching at the finality of it. Later, she sat in her car, watching from a distance. The lake reflected nothing now. Not light, not sky, not memory. The trees stood like sentinels, unmoving. A man in plain clothes arrived last, tall, gray-bearded, the kind of face shaped by disappointment and long hours. Detective Samuel Rhodes. He moved like someone accustomed to grief. She had heard of him. Of course, everyone in Savannah had. He had solved 2 high-profile cases in the last 5 years and failed to solve twice as many. His name carried both fear and fatigue. He had a reputation for following threads no matter how deep they ran, or whom they tangled. As he leaned over the body bag, Claire saw something shift in him, a stiffness in his spine. Recognition, perhaps, or dread. The press wouldn't know about the girl until morning, but Claire already knew what they would write. Unidentified female found dead near lake. They wouldn't know who she was yet, but Claire did. She had found her once, on Ethan's blazer, in the form of a golden hair. She had imagined her in someone else's arms, and now she had seen her submerged, drifting, silenced. The guilt hadn't reached her fully yet. It hovered nearby, waiting for an invitation. That night, the news didn't cover the discovery. Not yet. The only mention was a one-line blurb on a local blog. Police activity near Oglethorpe Lake. Developing story. That was all. Claire lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't spoken to Ethan. He hadn't called, hadn't texted. His silence was growing teeth. She thought of the note again. Detective Samuel Rhodes lit his first cigarette of the morning just after dawn. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops of Savannah when he stepped onto his porch. Coffee in one hand, smoke in the other. The familiar sting of nicotine burning a hole through his thoughts. He hadn't slept. Not really. The girl from the lake had followed him into his dreams and curled up behind his eyes like a memory, pretending to be something new. But she wasn't new. Not to him. He recognized her immediately. Mallory Vance, 22, student at SCAD, studied photography, a smile that tried too hard to hide her loneliness. Rhodes had seen it before, on victims, on suspects, on himself in the mirror some mornings. It was the kind of smile you learned to wear after life had taken too many pieces and left just enough for public display. He'd seen Mallory 3 months ago in the hallway of the courthouse. She had been leaving a meeting with the DA's office, pale and anxious, clinging to her phone like it might save her from drowning. She wasn't on record for any charges, and she wasn't testifying, just a visitor, just a ghost moving through the system. Now she was dead. The ME's report was thin. Blunt force trauma to the head. Submersion. Estimated time of death. 24 to 36 hours prior to discovery. No wallet. No ID. One silver bracelet engraved with initials. Yelsey. That was the thread. That was what made his pulse shift. The initials didn't match the victim, but they did match someone else. Ethan Lawrence Cross. The name hadn't appeared in his case files in years, but Rhodes had a mind like a filing cabinet, and some drawers never closed. Ethan Cross was the kind of man who wore respectability like armor. Successful, educated, well-spoken, but men like that had cracks. And sometimes, what leaked out was darker than anyone expected. There had been rumors, back then, whispers about a former client, an affair that ended abruptly, a confidentiality agreement, then silence, no charges, no proof, just a paper trail that stopped too neatly. Rhodes took his coffee black, his investigations Messier. That morning, he drove to the station, stopping only once to study the lake again. The scene was clean now, too clean. No tape, no crowd, just water and trees and silence. The kind of silence that knew how to keep secrets. At his desk, he began assembling a timeline. Mallory had last been seen 3 nights ago, leaving a local art show. She had walked home alone. Cameras caught her on River Street at 9:47 p.m. After that, nothing. Her phone pinged near Chestnut Street at 10:12 p.m. Then silence. Chestnut Street. He paused. That was where Ethan Cross lived. Rhodes leaned back in his chair, cigarette unlit between his fingers. He didn't believe in coincidences. He pulled the property records. The house belonged jointly to Ethan Cross and his wife, Claire Bennett, married 4 years. No children. Claire ran a small art gallery on the east side of town, known in the community, elegant, composed. The kind of woman people like without knowing why. He'd seen her once or twice. From a distance, church fundraisers, charity auctions. She had that look. The look of someone who had learned how to stand still while the world burned around her. He studied a photograph of the couple from a local magazine. Ethan's arm was around her waist, his smile precise. Claire's smile was quieter, fainter. Her eyes, though, her eyes were not smiling at all. By noon, Rhodes had a decision. He would visit the house. Not officially. Not yet. Sometimes the truth didn't come from knocking on the front door. Sometimes it came from the way people looked when they thought no one was watching. Detective Rhodes didn't wear his badge that morning. He left it in the glove box next to a half-finished pack of Camels and a crumpled photo from a case he never solved. Today, he wasn't here to ask questions. He was here to watch. The house on Chestnut Street stood like a monument to order. White shutters, painted porch, roses too carefully trimmed. Everything about it screamed control, intentional, curated, delicate. But Rhodes had long ago learned that the most polished surfaces often hid the deepest rot. He parked a block away and watched from inside his car, eyes narrowed behind a scratched pair of aviators. The street was quiet, the kind of southern quiet that felt peaceful until you realized it was just a pause before the thunder rolled in. At 10:03 a.m., Claire Bennett stepped out onto the porch. She wore black slacks, a light gray blouse, hair pinned back the way society women did, when they wanted to look professional but unthreatening. She moved with grace, but not ease. Her posture was too upright, her hands too still. People who weren't hiding something never moved that carefully. She stood by the railing for a moment, sipping from a travel mug, her eyes sweeping the street like a woman expecting someone, or hoping not to see someone at all. She checked her phone, twice, then disappeared back inside. Rhodes didn't move. He lit a cigarette, rolled the window down just enough to let the smoke escape, and waited. At 11:47 a.m., Ethan Cross arrived. Expensive suit, immaculate posture, keys dangling from his fingers like he had all the time in the world. He entered the house with a confidence that came from either innocence or practice. Rhodes had seen both before. 15 minutes passed. 20. Then Claire left again, this time alone. Her face was different now. Blank. Composed, but not neutral. There was something sharp behind her eyes. Not sadness. Not confusion. Resolve. She drove away in a dark green Audi, heading east. Rhodes gave her a minute's lead, then followed. No sirens. No taillights. Just distance. She didn't go to the gallery. She didn't go to the police. She didn't go anywhere someone in shock might go. She went to a hardware store. She emerged 10 minutes later, carrying a brown bag with both hands. He couldn't see the contents, but her grip was tight. Whatever she had purchased, it wasn't fragile, but it was heavy. She didn't stop again before returning home. He watched her carry the bag into the house. Saw her stand in the doorway for a long moment before closing the door slowly, deliberately, like sealing a tomb. Rhodes made a note in his pad. Claire, calm, focused, avoiding public. Purchase unknown item tool. Behavior inconsistent with trauma. Possible foreknowledge. But he didn't stop there. That afternoon, he returned to the lake. Not the waterline, but the woods behind it. Something had been bothering him since the body was found. Not the position, not the condition. The absence. There were no drag marks, no footprints, no broken reeds along the main trail. Someone had known a path less traveled. Someone had dumped the body from the other side of the lake, closer to the road that ran through the back of Chestnut. He climbed the slope near the old oak tree and paused. There, half buried beneath a blanket of pine needles, he saw something glint. It was a small key, clean, silver, no rust, recently dropped. He bagged it carefully. On its base, engraved in faint script, Bennett Storage, Unit 42. He stared at the inscription for a long time, because the Bennett family hadn't used their name for a business in years. Not since Claire's father died, not since the records disappeared, and not since Ethan Cross inherited everything that wasn't nailed down. Bennett Storage sat on the edge of Savannah's industrial district, wedged between a crumbling textile mill and an abandoned rail yard. The building looked forgotten, sheet metal siding faded by sun and storms, weeds thick around the fence, a plastic flag torn in half over the gate. The kind of place people used when they wanted to forget something existed. Detective Rhodes pulled in at dawn, the light still low enough to cast long shadows over the gravel lot. The air smelled of damp concrete and rust. His boots crunched as he crossed the keypad and punched in a master override code. He wasn't supposed to have it anymore, not since his official demotion 5 years earlier. But Savannah was a town that didn't forget favors, and someone still owed him. Unit 42 was at the far end of the corridor. The padlock was old, but the metal around it was clean. No dust, no cobwebs. It had been used recently. Rhodes inserted the key and turned slowly, the mechanism clicking open with a sound too loud for the morning silence. The door groaned as he rolled it up, revealing nothing at first but darkness and the smell of mildew. He flicked on his flashlight. Boxes lined the walls, stacked high, labeled in handwriting that hadn't aged well. Some said books, others kitchen, a few simply miscellaneous. But those weren't what drew him. At the back of the unit, beneath a green tarp covered in dust, something large loomed. He pulled the tarp free. A cedar chest. Old, hand-carved, the kind passed down through generations, built to survive decades and disasters. On its lid, burned into the wood, was the Bennett family crest, a weeping willow beneath a crescent moon. No lock, just 2 iron latches. Rhodes paused. Part of him didn't want to open it, but cases like this didn't leave room for comfort. He lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them. Polaroids, faded prints, some torn or bent. He picked one up carefully. A girl, 12 or 13, sitting beside a man whose face had been scratched out with what looked like a penknife. Another, Claire as a teenager, standing near that same lake, arms crossed, looking away from the camera. Another, her mother, unsmiling, holding a child with bruise barely visible beneath her collar. Then there were the newspaper clippings. Folded, yellowed, forgotten. Local attorney cleared of misconduct allegations. No charges filed. Tragedy at Bennett Estate. Fire claims father, daughter hospitalized. Savannah's art scene. Rising star Claire Bennett opens new gallery. A pattern was forming, not in what was said, but in what wasn't. Then he found the box. Small, velvet-lined, tucked beneath the photos like something sacred or dangerous. Inside it, a necklace. Not expensive, not flashy, just a delicate gold chain with a tiny heart-shaped charm. On the back of the charm, engraved in almost imperceptible script, MV, Mallory Vance. Rhodes closed the box with trembling fingers. This wasn't just about an affair, or a body dumped in a lake. This was older, deeper, a story told in silence and fire, in bruises and half-erased faces. Claire Bennett had secrets, but Ethan Cross might have had worse. As he locked the unit behind him, Rhodes knew one thing with absolute clarity. The lake wasn't the only place something had drowned. The chest had been touched. Claire noticed it immediately when she stepped into the storage unit later that night. Something in the way the tarp was folded wrong, a subtle shift in the boxes, like fingers had searched without knowing what they were looking for. Someone had been here. Her heart began to race, but her face remained still. She knew the trick of keeping calm while the storm was already inside her. The skill had been learned early, honed through years of pretending not to hear the shouting behind closed doors, pretending not to notice her father's drinking or her mother's vanishing silences. She didn't open the chest. She didn't need to. She knew what was in it. And more importantly, she knew what was missing. The necklace, the one she had taken from Mallory's apartment the night Ethan confessed. The charm was small, almost meaningless, except that it carried proof. Ethan had sworn the girl meant nothing, that it was just a mistake. But Claire knew his patterns. She had been one of them. Once, she left the storage unit and didn't look back, not until she reached her car and saw the envelope on the windshield. It wasn't sealed. Inside, one photo. Claire standing at the lake, the body floating behind her, taken from a distance. The implication wasn't subtle. Someone was watching. Detective Rhodes didn't sleep either. The photos from the storage unit stayed with him, burning behind his eyes. He had seen patterns like this before. Broken women, powerful men, violence covered with silence and wealth. But this time, it wasn't just about guilt. It was about control and survival. He returned to headquarters before sunrise and began digging. Court records, financials, personal logs. Anything tied to Ethan Cross or Claire Bennett in the last 5 years. One document stood out, a non-disclosure agreement filed under a corporate subsidiary with no real business presence. The signatories, Ethan Cross and Harper Lane. The date, 3 years ago. It wasn't just Claire and Mallory. Harper had been involved, too, but she had stayed quiet. Until now, Rhodes picked up his coat. Something was coming undone, and if he didn't act fast, someone else would end up buried. But he was already too late when he arrived at Harper's rental apartment. The front door was cracked open. No lights inside. No sound. He moved carefully, gun drawn, heart still. She was in the kitchen, on the floor, eyes wide, neck slashed. Her hand still gripped the burner phone, its screen glowing with one unsent message. To Claire, one word. They found Claire on the bluff above the river, just past midnight, barefoot, dressed in black. Her hand stained with something darker than mud. She didn't run, didn't cry, didn't speak. She simply stood there, eyes locked on the water below, as if the tide might rise and take her with it. Detective Rhodes had arrived minutes earlier, summoned by a patrol unit who recognized the vehicle and the name. He knew, even before stepping out of the cruiser, that everything had snapped. And yet, the moment didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the first truth finally surfacing. Claire sat silently in the back of the squad car, wrapped in a wool blanket, her skin pale from wind and memory. She hadn't resisted. She hadn't denied. She had only asked for one thing. Let me see the photos. The ones from the lake, from the storage unit, from Harper's kitchen floor. He handed them to her, without a word. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded. Back at the station, Rhodes pieced it together. Not from confessions, not from evidence, but from the weight of what had been left unsaid for far too long. Harper had tried to protect her. She'd tried 3 years ago, when she signed an NDA after Ethan ended their affair and threatened to destroy her career. But guilt had a way of resurfacing, especially when it wore another girl's face. Mallory had reminded her of Claire. Too much, too soon. And when she learned Ethan had found another, Harper cracked. She told Claire everything. That night, Claire followed Ethan. She saw them together. Mallory, Ethan, their routine lie unfolding behind closed doors and hotel curtains. She hadn't killed Mallory, but she had followed her. She had seen her die because someone else had already decided she was a problem. Ethan, it hadn't been rage. It had been silence. Clean, controlled, just like everything he did. And then, to cover the body, he had turned to Claire, or rather, dared her, knowing her past, her family's shame, her name bound to ruin. He didn't need to force her. He only needed to let her remember what her father had done to her mother, what her mother had covered up, what she herself had buried beneath years of curated normalcy. In the end, she carried Mallory to the lake, alone, wrapped her in the blanket she now shivered in, dropped her into the water like a stone meant to vanish, not to protect Ethan, but to protect herself from becoming the woman her mother had been, from losing everything she'd built, from facing who she had married. But the mistake wasn't the act. It was the silence that followed. And when Harper broke that silence, when she tried to expose it, Ethan silenced her too, this time more violently, more desperately. He had known Rhodes was getting close, that the lake wouldn't hold its secrets forever. Now, Ethan was gone, vanished, phone disconnected, office emptied, his car found near a Dock 2 county south. Empty, but Rhodes didn't believe in ghosts or clean exits. He believed in unfinished stories. Claire was never charged with murder. The DA couldn't make it stick. Not without the weapon, not without the body of Ethan Cross, and not with the city already whispering its forgiveness. She closed the gallery 3 weeks later, left town a month after that. No one saw her again, but sometimes late at night, Rhodes would drive past the lake and think about all the things that don't float. Weeks passed. The lake grew still again. The media cycle shifted, and the town moved on the way towns always do. Slowly, politely, half ashamed of their curiosity. Claire was gone. Ethan was gone. The Bennett name, once whispered at art shows and charity events, vanished from conversation like smoke and fog. But Detective Rhodes didn't move on. He couldn't, not because of the case, but because he had been part of it long before the first body hit the water. The truth hadn't come from forensics. It had come from memory, from guilt, from one night years ago when a younger Rhodes, half drunk and grieving a failed marriage, had sat alone in a dive bar and watched Ethan cross-charm a girl barely 21. Her name wasn't Mallory. It wasn't Harper. It was Lena. She disappeared 2 weeks later. No charges, no search, just a footnote in a missing persons report. Rhodes had always suspected Ethan, but without proof, suspicion rots. So when Mallory surfaced, both literally and metaphorically, he saw not just a case, but a chance, a way to set it right. So he watched, waited, and when the timing was perfect, he nudged. A phone call to Harper, reminding her of the past. A photo slipped onto Claire's windshield. A key dropped near the lake. Evidence found, not placed, but never by accident. He hadn't planted the necklace. He hadn't killed Harper. but he had left the window open just enough for the storm to blow in, because justice wasn't blind. It was watching, and sometimes the truth needed help to surface. 2 months later, Rhodes stood by the lake, coat flapping in the wind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an object he hadn't shown anyone, a burner phone, recovered from Harper's apartment. The screen still worked. One final unsent message blinked softly. "Sam, I can't do this." She had reached out to him, not to Claire, to him, and he had ignored it, because if she had spoken, the game would have ended too soon. He threw the phone into the water, watched it sink. No ripples, no struggle, just silence. Because sometimes justice isn't about guilt, it's about balance. And in Savannah, nothing stays buried forever, except the men who deserve it.